Hey guys, welcome back. It's Macias, and we have another edition of Macias's lecture. This one on part of the lead up to World War II. This one's called Aggressors on the March, Causes of World War II. Now, as with all the lectures before, you can pause as you need to make sure that you get the notes that you need. Now, I do encourage you to keep listening to the audio here on the lecture, because it does add to and enhances what you see in the lecture and what you're copying down. Okay, so remember, pause as you need to get the notes you need. I will briefly pause after I stop talking in between slides, and then I'll move on. But again, pause as you need to. All right, so Aggressors on the March, Causes of World War II. This is part of the lead up, still talking about how mainly Italy, Germany, and Japan started to turn their nations into highly aggressive nations and imperial nations, meaning they're taking people over. All right, so let's go. All right, so first talking about the rising sun of Japan. All right, the Japanese feel that they came from an ancient people that are descended directly from the sun. That's a very simplistic way of looking at their kind of like their origin story. But their flag kind of was known. It showed this idea on their flag. All right, so that they came out of the rising sun. But democracy in the 20s in Japan, it kind of caught on. The way they looked at it was that if the economy was good, democracy was okay. They did have an emperor, which was kind of weird, pairing that with democracy, but for the Japanese it worked. Hirohito was the emperor, and he was the head of state, but he had little real government power. Most of the government power laid in the civilian leaders. But after the Great Depression, democracy really took a hit, because Japan was hit very hard by the Depression, and people blamed the government for the economic problems. They didn't look at government as having solved anything, so military leaders started to gain a lot of popularity and support from the people. Now, these military leaders in Japan started taking advantage of the unrest, and soon they gained control of the government. In other words, all these military leaders, they started making the decisions for the government, and they wanted to plan a Pacific empire, because remember, Japan is located in the Pacific Ocean. And they planned a Pacific empire that would bring resources, wealth, and prestige to Japan. All right, so above all, they needed resources so that they could keep their own economy going. They wanted to build their wealth and their prestige, because as with every nation during the Great Depression, everybody's pride, everybody's feelings took a big hit, along with their pocketbooks and their livelihood. All right, so Japan wanted some of those good days back. One smart thing, though, that these military leaders did was they did not remove the emperor. They knew how important the emperor was to the people of Japan, so they left him on the throne. He just, again, didn't have much real government power before, and now under this military dictatorship, he hardly had any power at all. He was really just more of a symbol than anything. But it was a very popular move, this military support of the emperor, and it got the people behind the military leadership in Japan. So the military was playing the people really well. Now, to get things started with their imperial ambitions, Japan invaded Manchuria, which is part of northern China today, in 1931. And once we're all done with World War II and we kind of look back at things, we see that really World War II started in 1931 with Japan's invasion of Manchuria. So really World War II started earlier in Asia than it ever did for the people in Europe. But that's for historians to debate and bicker over. Anyway, Japan invades. They invade their neighbors on mainland Asia. Manchuria had a lot of resources that Japan coveted, and so they decided to just go in and take them. Problem was that the League of Nations at the time, this was forbidden. This was forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles. This was forbidden by the League of Nations. Clearly, Japan didn't care. All right, they went ahead and invaded anyway. What did the League of Nations do? Nothing. They filed protests. They sent letters. Japan didn't answer them, and so the League of Nations just said, okay, please don't do it again. Yeah, Japan kept ignoring the League of Nations. And finally, they just upright and said, we're leaving the League of Nations. We look at you as weak, we look at you as indecisive, and we have things to do. So Japan said, we're out of the league. And they did. They left. Next, Japan invaded China proper, the main part of China, 1937. Okay, so they're messing around in Manchuria, conquering the people, extracting resources, taking them back to Japan, further building their military and industrial might. Next, they move on to China, and by now, the Japanese army is battle-hardened, they're well-trained, and now they're even better equipped than they were before. All right, so Japan comes into China, and they just start pounding the cities. I mean, the cities are just getting hammered by the Japanese. And one major Chinese city in particular, Nanjing, really took a bad hit. All right, we're talking not only destruction of the city and the buildings and all that stuff, but massive and just horrible mistreatment and even murder of captured Chinese people. To the Japanese, surrendering was a form of personal dishonor and disgrace. They themselves will not surrender, and they looked at others who did surrender as usually not even worth keeping around, not worth living. And so they would treat their prisoners horribly, and sometimes they would even just flat out execute them. They would shoot them, they would behead them, or they would hang them. Pretty brutal stuff. But Nanjing, that Chinese city, the way that city was destroyed and the way the people were treated, it was called the Rape of Nanjing. So we have some Chinese prisoners roped up there with a Japanese guard, and they're being led off to be shot. We have Nanjing here being invaded and destroyed. Debris everywhere. Explosion and something on fire there on the right in the background. People running. Very dangerous. A Chinese prisoner about to be beheaded. The Japanese soldiers carried a lot of swords. They carried samurai swords. They carried all kinds of swords with them. Not only for military dress and for ceremonial dress, but for this reason. Okay, just nonchalantly carrying a dead baby, not seeming really to care. Not seeming to care. Pretty bad stuff. A very famous photo of a Chinese baby left on a train track in the wreckage of what used to be part of Nanjing. And then a political cartoon of Japan looking something like an octopus, reaching with its tentacles to capture most of Asia. And this map gives us an idea of Japan's aspirations. All the by 1942, I know that jumps a little ahead of where we're at now, but in Japan's conquests by 1942, they control everything in red, including all of these islands out here. some of these islands are taken away from the U.S. Some of these islands are taken away from other nations. So Japan is extremely powerful in the 30s and into the 40s. So this is what they're talking about by wanting to create a Japanese empire and a Japanese stronghold on the Pacific. And they pretty much did it. All right, so that's basically Japan during the 30s. Their transition from a quasi-democracy to the being in the dumps with the Great Depression, and then essentially willing themselves out of depression through military dictatorship, conquest, and imperialism. Now let's switch over to Italy and their aspirations. They start with Africa. So Italy under Mussolini, they start with Africa and they go after Ethiopia. Now, if you'll recall, Italy tried invading Ethiopia back in the 1880s, and it didn't. 1870s, 1880s, somewhere around there. Didn't work out too well for them. All right, the Italians were beat bad. Italian prisoners taken by the Ethiopians were actually castrated. In other words, they had their genitalia cut off, and then they were sent back to Italy with their genitalia gone. So pretty bad and humiliating defeat for the Italians. Here, Italy makes no bones about it. They come in fast, they come in hard with modern weapons, and they just completely eviscerate the Ethiopians. I mean, they tear through them like a hot knife through butter. Now, why was Italy so bold on this? Why did they hit them so hard? They looked at what Japan did in Manchuria and China, and they saw that the League did nothing, and Italy said, and Mussolini said, well, let's try it. Let's try it out. They're successful. All right, again, the League does nothing. Now, not only did the League do nothing except send letters of protest and say, oh, Italy, you're being bad, knock it off. No, the League of Nations did next to nothing. Britain still controlled parts of Egypt at this time, a lot of parts of Egypt actually, including the Suez Canal, which is a major waterway that connects two oceans. And it's basically a giant canal. It's a giant river, a man-made river through land. So Britain controls this, and what they did is they even allowed the Italians to go from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and then have an easier time of getting to Africa, getting to Ethiopia. So it's not like the British didn't really help the Italians get through. They just didn't stop them when the Italians told them, look, we're going this way and this is where we're going. The British said, okay. So if not assistance, it was just at least Britain kind of turning a blind eye. And this is kind of what we'll refer to as, these are early examples of appeasement. And in a nutshell, essentially, appeasement is letting a bully get what they want so that they won't hit you. All right, so letting the bully get away with everything just so that you hope that the bully doesn't turn on you. That's essentially what everyone is doing with Japan and Italy so far. Turning a blind eye, hoping that they won't come after them next. So here we have Ethiopia, which you guys are familiar with now with our geography studies of Africa. So this is the Suez Canal going through here, this top part of Egypt. So Italy goes from here, the boot of Italy, along the Mediterranean Sea, gets Britain's permission to go through this little strip of land from the Mediterranean Sea to Red Sea, and then they travel down here, come in and attack Ethiopia. A little bit closer in look. And here's this is where your Suez Canal is, right in here. Again, coming in with the heavy weapons, tanks against horses and cavalry, or excuse me, horses and horse riding riflemen. All right, not much of a match. This is why the Ethiopians were absolutely destroyed in this battle. Tanks versus horses. Ethiopia never had a chance. Spears, rifles, and shields versus rifles, machine guns, and tanks. Executing village leaders. All right, so taking a look at our, when we looked at Rise of Fascism, we know that Hitler basically started rebuilding Germany's military, not only rebuilding Germany's economy and giving Germans some prestige and pride back, but rebuilding the military big time. And everyone also knew that this flew in the face of the Treaty of Versailles. Again, Hitler didn't care. We've seen that. Okay, he didn't care. He defied Versailles, and finally, in March 1935, Hitler just says, you know what, we're no longer going to obey the Treaty of Versailles. I think we're done with it. We've outgrown it. All right, Versailles is so 1919. Okay, we're done. And everyone was like, meh, okay, that was it. So, fast forward to 1936, Germany lost the Rhineland in the Treaty of Versailles, which was a part of Germany, Western Germany, that was very rich in coal and iron and resources that were heavily needed for industry and for weapons making. So Germany in 1936, they took it back. They just marched right in and took it back. Not a shot was fired, and it was controlled by France, but France just let them come in and take it back. The French were, again, dealing with their own problems, trying to get out of the Depression. They were dealing with they were trying to deal with socialist and communist threats of taking over the democratic government. And so France was really in no position and really no mood to try to stop the Germans. So they did nothing. They just let the Germans march in and retake the Rhineland. Next, Hitler knew he needed some allies. He needed some friends if he was going to keep on the path that he was on. So what he did is he saw that in Italy, with Mussolini in Italy, and with the military leadership in Japan, he saw, I guess, what we could call kindred spirits. In other words, he saw like-minded people, aggressive, ruthless, imperial in nature, meaning they were looking at conquest, and they all believed that the strong struggle to survive, and only the strong will keep struggling until they win and conquer all the weak. And so Hitler saw that with Mussolini in Italy and the military dictatorship in Japan, that these two countries would make good allies with him. And so the three of them formed what's called the Tripartite Pact. We'll take another quick look at that during World War II, but they formed the Tripartite Pact, but the world would better know them as the Axis powers. Axis powers. And not to be outdone, Germany started calling itself the Third Reich, meaning the Third German Empire. And as we saw, again, remember back we saw in the video that Hitler meant for this new German Reich, this new German Empire, to last for 1,000 years. All right, so we'll take a little bit closer look here at appeasement. Officially, appeasement is giving in to an aggressor in order to avoid war. All right, remember, all the nations of Europe had fought in World War I. No one was in any mood to get back into a war with anybody. Britain didn't want to fight. France didn't want to fight. Clearly, Germany wanted to fight, but they publicly put on the face that, no, we don't want to fight either. But remember, Germany is gearing up to be able to fight. They're just biding their time, building up their military, and just playing nice with everybody until they're ready to strike. But no one knows that yet. So another way of looking at appeasement is giving a bully what they want so that they won't pick on you. All right, that's what the nations of Europe started to do with Hitler, and it's what the League of Nations had already done with Mussolini and with Japan. All right, they just simply let them have their way to keep the peace. That was always the excuse they gave, to keep the peace. And yes, peace is a good thing to keep. But when you're dealing with these kinds of people that we saw with Germany, Mussolini, Germany, Italy, and Japan, okay, it's a mistake. Right? You have to take the bad guys out when the bad guys need to be taken out. But that's not what was happening. Appeasement was happening instead. So 1938, the Nazis come in and they took over Austria, all right, which is a German-speaking nation to the south of Germany. They just walked right in. Now, many of the Austrian people simply saw this as a natural move. Many of them didn't have a problem with it. And so there was no major complaint made to the League of Nations. Not that Germany and Hitler would have listened anyway, but you have essentially a takeover of another sovereign power by military men under the direction of Hitler. They come in and they just take over Austria. And the Austrians are just like, all right, yeah, cool. All right, this sounds pretty good. Now we're one big German-speaking people. All right, and this takeover of Austria was called Anschluss. Anschluss. Again, nothing from Britain, France, or the League of Nations. They just simply said nothing. They did nothing. They just simply let Hitler have Austria. Again, in defiance of the treaty, but we had already seen and heard that Hitler said the treaty to him is dead. It means nothing. Hitler's hunger for land knew no bounds. In part of what was the former Austro-Hungarian Empire was a nation called Czechoslovakia. This was also to Germany's south, and a northern part of this nation, bordering Germany, was what was called the Sudetenland. And this part of Czechoslovakia was full of a lot of German-speaking people. So what Hitler and the Nazis, what they looked at it as, was that a foreign nation had control over German-speaking people. And these German-speaking people needed to be liberated, rescued from the Czech government. So they come in and the Nazis with their military march right in. No shots fired. A very bloodless takeover. Now, before they do that, Hitler demanded it, said, these are German-speaking people. We want it. You must give it to us. Britain and France said, no. No, don't do that. All right, you're getting a little bit too imperious here. You need to slow down. All right, you have Germany, you have Austria. Clearly two people that probably belong together. But the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia are a sovereign nation that you can't just come in and take. But, as I said earlier, Germany comes in and just takes it anyway. They just march in. So now we come to what's called the Munich Conference. Munich is a city in Germany, and so ministers, in other words, government leaders from France, Britain, and Germany, they come into the Munich Conference, and they meet, they talk, Hitler's there, and Britain and France come to an agreement, and again, here is appeasement, they say to Hitler, okay, go ahead and take the Sudetenland, but no more. All right, you can have, you took Austria, all right, you took the Rhineland, you took Austria, you built up your military, you took the Sudetenland, but no more. This is where it stops. You're done. And Hitler said, that's fair. I agree. That's cool. That sounds good. All right. Thank you. I think we're done here. Have a nice trip home. So everybody leaves. Several months later, Hitler just marches in and takes the rest of sovereign Czechoslovakia. He just walks in and takes it. There is some fighting here. But the Nazis, they just march right. The Czechs didn't put up much of resistance. They've only been a nation not even 20 years. All right, so they weren't able to put up much resistance at all. After some shots are fired, they give up. But now, finally, the world was understanding, and especially Britain and France were understanding what and who they were dealing with in Hitler and the Nazis. And they finally understood that Hitler was just going to keep taking until someone stopped him. Now, let's go ahead and recap here. Hitler partners with Italy and Japan. We have the Axis powers. Poland. Poland is a nation that had existed at one time before, but once the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire, once they had formed their borders, Poland really ceased to exist a long, long time ago. Well, after World War I, after Russia loses all that territory to Germany and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1917, and after Germany's land is taken away and the Austro-Hungarian Empire is completely broken up, a new nation of Poland was formed, and what it did is Poland had Germany on one side and Russia on the other. Okay, so Poland had two countries on each side. Neither of them liked Poland because Poland had been made out of land that those two countries had before, Germany and Russia. So Poland cuts off, because of the Treaty of Versailles, Poland actually cuts off most of Germany from a smaller part of Germany that's called East Prussia, an extremely proud and important part of Germany to the German people. And Poland is separating this part of Germany from the rest of Germany. All right, so the Germans hate Poland. All right, they hate Poland because it splits up their country. Germany wants East Prussia back. Poland says, no, you would have to encroach on our sovereign territory. The Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations says that you can't do it. Don't do it. So when Poland tells Hitler no, Britain and France, they say, if Germany invades you, Poland, we will back you up. We will back you up militarily. So what does Hitler do? He's sneaky. We know he's evil, but he's also no dummy. And recall that what I said about Nazis and communists hating each other? They do. They hate each other. And Stalin and Hitler hate each other. But Hitler sees opportunity. He signs what was called a non-aggression pact with Stalin. And what the non-aggression pact simply says is that I, Hitler, will not attack Russia. Stalin, Russia, you will not attack Germany. That's all it means. However, secretly between the two of them, the non-aggression pact was made public. However, the secret agreement between the two was that they were both going to attack Poland from both sides, and they would split Poland. Russia would get its territory, some of the territory that it lost during World War I, and Germany would get the part of Poland back and rejoin East Prussia with the rest of Germany. So even though Hitler and Stalin, Nazi Germany and the USSR hated each other, they saw opportunity, and what they saw was the opportunity to get rid of Poland, get their land back, and become even stronger. So here we are at the summer of 1939. Hitler and Nazi Germany have built themselves up into a very, very strong power. Japan is just conquering nations and territory left and right over in East Asia. And Italy, excuse me, Italy is not only strengthening itself, but now it's starting to take over parts of Africa, specifically Ethiopia. So we have three very strong nations, and now all of a sudden, Nazi Germany has essentially what's called a peace pact with Stalin and Russia. Everybody freaks. They can't believe it. A non-aggression pact between Stalin and Hitler was the last thing that they expected. Now everybody's worried. So here, summer of 1939, the world is on a razor's edge. They know that war is a big risk, but no one's ready for it and no one wants to fight. The only ones who are ready, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy. All right, make sure you have your notes all done. Don't forget to do your 2 to 3 questions along your left-hand margin, your summaries along the bottom margins, and this is where we'll leave off for now. We see how World War II actually gets started next week. All right, make sure you have these notes ready to check during the next class time. All right, guys, take care.